This is part 5 of our series on how to use Ultimaker Cura for complete beginners. In this video, we will learn how to use support blockers to block supports in certain places, but not others. And we will look at how to troubleshoot failed 3D prints. A student of mine sent me this file of these Elegoo Neptune 3 Plus tool racks that slide on the side of your printer. And I know for a fact they also work for the Elegoo Neptune 3 Pro. And it's really cool because it's always nice to have a place to keep your tools. If you look how it slides on, you have to remove 3 screws right here off to the side of the printer in order to slide it on. But it's a pretty cool and simple little 3D print that we can use to sort of summarize everything we've learned so far. And so you can download the files and find it in the zip folder. I've actually already downloaded it. Let me go grab it. And I chose the slide-on version of the print. Go ahead and open that. And you can see that this is going to need supports in a lot of places. Let's go ahead and just slice it at 30% infill with a 65-degree overhang and a skirt just to see what it looks like with all of the supports without blocking anything. If we go to preview, you can imagine how annoying it's going to be to remove all of these supports in all of these places. In some places you do need supports like here on the back, but in some places, as we'll explore, you really don't need these little supports here or even this group of supports right here. And so let's go back to prepare. And so why don't we need most of them? Well, if you look right here at this part, it's very clear that it's just going to bridge all the way across versus on the back, it's clear that this overhang angle won't actually print anything. Let me go ahead and slice this with supports off so you can see what I'm talking about. And so with no supports at all, if we go into preview, if we look on the back and you just look at multiple places in the layers, right? Like right here at the bottom of the O. Do you see how there's nothing to connect to this part of the print? It's just going to be just pieces of plastic that just sort of plop downwards, and it's, you know, you're not going to get any of that detail. The same thing is going to happen once we get to this overhang right here. If we go up to it, let me change my angle so I can see what I'm doing here. If we go up to it, do you see how once again there's nothing underneath this to print? So these are perfect examples of where we need supports. Versus if we go down here to the bottom, once we get to that layer, let me change to my keyboard so I can just go up slowly here. Once we get to this layer right here, it's going to have no problem bridging. It'll be a little droopy because of that stringy effect that you'll get whenever it bridges, but I'm going for function here. I don't really care if this looks perfect. And so if we look right here, for example, as this comes up right here, we're going to have no problem with the bridge up here at the top as well. So we'll be fine. This overhang with these letters, again, it's going to have no problem doing that small, tiny overhang to get these letters going because it has something to connect to and it's such a small distance as it goes. And so we can block most of these supports, but we don't need to block all of them. So let's go back to prepare and let's grab our support blockers and let's start putting them down where we know we won't need supports. And I'm going to start right here. And what I don't want to do is just put a bunch of supports down in every single spot. I'm going to go ahead and undo all of that. What I can do is just put down the first one, click on it, and then go to scale. And then I can change the size. And if I have uniform scaling on, I can change it in all directions, just like a normal 3D print. But if I have it off, I can change it in just one direction. You can see that I'm only changing the green direction. So for example, if I want to make the red direction, let's say I want the X direction here, which is red, to be 500. And we look at that and it looks like that's actually a pretty good distance in that direction. Maybe move it a little bit to the right so that we're not blocking any of these supports over here, but I do want it to come out of the front. That's kind of nice. And then I can go ahead and grab it again and click my scale. And let's say I want to go up in this direction a little bit and we want it to go in this direction. You can see I can click on the cube sticking out of the side of the scale feature, or I can change it, a little bit more precisely over here. Let's make it, 1,000 and see how that looks. And it's still not going all the way across here. So maybe we go to 1,500. and now it is long enough, but it's just not in the right spot. So I'll go back to my translation tool and grab this arrow and drag it to the right a little bit. And now you can see that I'm blocking all of these supports that Cura thinks it needs for these fillets as they come up, but I'm not blocking anything in the back over here that I want to block. Like I'm not blocking these things. I'm not blocking these letters. And then what else do I want? Well, I want to drag it up a little bit, right? And so we want to block a little bit more. I don't want any of these supports on the inside because I'm just thinking about how annoying it's going to be to break off all these little supports as I go. So I grab my scale tool and I drag it up a little bit. And let's see how that looks if I slice that as is. And I got to make sure I turn on supports before I hit slice and go to preview. And let's see how this one looks. And I always like to check to make sure I did a good job before I actually save it to my removable drive. And so if you look on the back, you can see, well, that looks pretty good. It's going to hold it up as it goes. Now there's something underneath those letters as they print up. But if we look at the front, you can see, well, looks like I must have missed something because there are still supports over here at the front that I'm pretty sure I wouldn't need. And then, of course, the last thing is, look how little surface area of the supports that are actually touching the plate. I don't really care about, the toolkit itself because there's plenty of surface area already touching, but these supports have almost nothing. And so I really should add a raft as well. So let's go ahead and change that setting to raft for ourselves. And we really don't need that much, maybe only 1, 2, or 3 millimeters. I'm going to go back to prepare. And it looks like there's the culprit right there. I didn't quite block this. And so if I select my support again and I drag it up a little bit higher, I make sure I block those supports as well. Make sure raft is on with only 2 millimeters and hit slice. And go to preview. And like I said, I always like to check to make sure it looks good layer by layer. I mean, I don't go super slow, but I drag it up slowly and make sure that everything is clearly going to print as it goes. And it looks pretty good. We got supports underneath both of these. We've got supports underneath all of these letters here. And we have a raft holding up all of these supports. And so I think we're good here. I think I can print this with some confidence. Now, you'll notice off to the left, we have a pretty long name, and I don't like having long names because sometimes the printers won't actually read it if the name is too long. And so we can definitely edit this down a little bit. I know for certain we can get rid of this first part, and then I do want to make sure I can identify it. So maybe I will keep the name Elegoo because it is for an Elegoo printer, but delete everything that we don't really need and still be able to identify it. So maybe I'll just call it Elegoo slide attach. And that name is probably short enough that it'll pick up and read in the printer. Let's from there go ahead and hit save to removable drive and hit eject. And then I'll just throw it on my printer and print it and we'll see how it goes.
10 hours later.
Okay, so if we take a look at this print now that we're done with it, we can see that it came out pretty good. You can see the raft here. We can see that this part that I predicted wouldn't need supports. It's a little stringy. You can hear when I scratch it that it's not completely flat like you might want on some prints. But again, I'm looking for function on this, and this is just a tray to hold things. If we look back, let me minimize this for a second, at what this is actually doing, it's just holding small things. It looks like there's a little problem here. Let's go ahead and take the raft and the supports off so we can examine this a little bit more closely. And of course, sometimes you need your flush cutters to get these rafts off or these supports off. That's kind of why you have the flush cutters. You can make them flush with the item that you're working with and then sort of snip, and it sort of lifts up the raft because it becomes flush with the surface. And so you can see that the raft doesn't always come off too easy. So there are downsides to using a raft because you have to get it off, and you can see we don't get that clean surface here on the bottom. But once again, I'm okay with that because this is supposed to be functional here. Let's go ahead and break off these supports on the back as well. Once again, I'll use my flush cutters. What I won't do is squeeze and cut all the way through. I'll just squeeze enough to get a grip and then kind of twist, and it just sort of pops off. And sometimes you can do some of it with your hands. And we can see that elegoo actually came out pretty clean. Of course, we're looking at it upside down. It's going to go on this way. So this is right side up. Let's go ahead and get these supports off the top here as well. If we look, we can see my camera's having a hard time focusing here. What if I move my light over to the other side? That's better. We can see that it still came out a little stringy. Maybe those supports didn't do as good as they could have, but it looks like we have enough leeway to slide it on the way it's supposed to. The letters came out clean. As I said earlier, we didn't quite get a flat surface here, but it looks like we have all the shapes we need for all our tools. Let's go ahead and try out the drawer. If you look, there was an issue here. It was pretty stringy here on the inside. And I actually, looking at it, you might have a hard time seeing it on camera, but I think I know the problem. I think I made a mistake in blocking this support here. We'll look at that in a second. Let's just go ahead and see if the drawer works. And as I try to slide the drawer in, there is a bit of a clearance problem. I bet I could force it in if I wanted to, but the question is will I be able to get it out? You know, we don't want a compression fit here. So, well, maybe we can clear out some of this stringiness and make ourselves a little bit more room, which is a little ironic because the whole point was to not have to go in here with our flush cutters and get those supports out. But, you know, you live, you learn. And I think it's going to be more trouble than it's worth to figure this out. And I think I have a workaround for this. So let's go back and let's look at our 3D print and see why it happened. If we look right here, this is the area where we see this stringiness. And as we come up, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. As we come up to that layer where this happens, you can see that there is no way for the bridging effect to happen because, well, there's nothing to bridge to. It draws this line, but this line has nothing underneath it, which is why you would need supports before the bridging could take place. And so basically it's trying to bridge. It connects to this end and then it comes back this way and there's nothing to grab to. And after a couple layers, it will correct itself because there will be enough string and nonsense to build off of here. But it's clear that is the problem.
Thank you, Captain Hindsight! Thank you!
And so how would I solve that? Well, let's start with how I would solve it to make sure it doesn't happen again in the future. So what print should you guys do if you're following along with me before you try this out? Let's go ahead and edit this support so that it's not so long this way. And so maybe we'll only make it 500 this way and then drag it back over here so that we're still blocking the supports on this side, and 500 was clearly not big enough. So maybe 700. And so now we're blocking all the supports on this side, but I still want to block these supports down here. And that's because if we look once again, I don't really care about how this looks up here. I just care about the function of this piece right here, which is just to have things sit inside of it. And so we'll just add one more support here and then make it bigger in those directions again so we can scale. I think in this direction maybe 750, and then in this direction maybe 500, and then I don't know, we'll go 300 in this direction. And that's a little bit too high, so go down to 200. I don't want it to block up hear any of this. And so even that is probably too big. Probably go down to 150 and we're still good. And then I can just drag it to where I want it so that I'm blocking everything I want to block. And I can also drag it down a little bit and then a little bit to the side. And so now we're still blocking. Let me move this up to the side and close this out. We're still blocking everything at the bottom that we wanted to block, but now we'd be able to build supports in this area. It's going to be a little annoying getting those supports in the back out with our flush cutters, but as we saw, it'd probably be a little bit less annoying than what we ended up with. So let's go ahead and slice this, move this off out of the way, and let's look at the difference. And you can see that everything else is the exact same, but we'll have these supports to build off of right at this layer right here, so we don't have to worry about all that stringy mess. And those supports really are thin enough that we could probably break them off pretty easy. And so we get just the lesser of two evils here. But I don't want to print this again. And so how can I actually fix this? And to do it, I have an idea, but you have to download a new tool. And I was planning on teaching this anyway in a later video. So let's go ahead and just take care of this little part of a lesson now. So we're going to go into Marketplace, and we are going to type in Mesh Tools. Just typing in Mesh, I should be able to scroll through until I see Mesh Tools. And you can see that I've already installed it. You need to install it, and usually when you install something, you also have to restart Cura. So go ahead and install it, and then close out Cura, and then reload this up. I don't have to do all that because, like I said, I've already installed it. Now, what can I do with my Mesh Tools? Well, what I can do is I can right-click on my part and go to Mesh Tools. I now have this option, and I want to go down to Split Model into Parts. And what this will do is it'll actually separate this drawer from this entire piece. So now I can move things independently. And it looks like there's more than just the two parts. It looks like none of this was actually built together. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all these extra things. And basically that's the beauty of it, is I can delete everything else and just have my drawers left. And so let's go ahead and delete everything, including whatever that little tiny thing is down there, if I can click on it. And so all we have left is the drawer, and I can move it around, and it looks like it actually separated the handle from the drawer itself. I'm going to hit Control-Z on my keyboard, and if I want to move it, I can just hold Shift on my keyboard and click on the second piece, and now they'll both move together. But basically, I just want to slice this. Now, what I can now do with this piece is actually I'm going to go ahead and reselect them both by holding Shift and clicking on both. I'm going to go back to scale, and I can change the size of this in just one direction. And why am I doing that? Well, if we look back here, it's not having a problem left to right, or presumably forward and back. It's just from the top to the bottom. Because of this clearance problem that we have, because of no supports, this isn't sliding in. So what happens if we only make it smaller in one direction? So I'll make sure uniform scaling is off. And let's go down to 95% only in the Z direction. And it just gets the tiniest bit smaller. I'm going to go ahead and slice this. Hit preview. I always like to check to make sure it's going to be good. And I really don't need a raft on this one. So let's go ahead and get rid of that raft. Go to skirt. And then hit slice again. Because of all this surface area, I'll be fine without the raft, I think. And I don't think there's going to be any problems with this. It looks like it's only going to take about 23 minutes. I might change the name here to Slide On Drawer, just so I know. But this will be done in about 23 minutes. I'll let you know how it goes, and we can wrap up this video.
20 minutes later.
Okay, so we're finished. Let's take a look. You can see that this one doesn't fit, and if we compare it to our new one, you can kind of see, I don't know if you can make that out in the camera, but you can see that one is a little bit smaller in that height direction. It's just the tiniest bit shorter here. And so actually, if you look at it, you can see that it isn't completely flat over there on the left. We call that warping, and that's actually something we're going to talk about how to prevent in the next video. So that's actually kind of a nice coincidence. But let's see if this one fits inside now. And you can see it actually fits pretty well. It has no problem at all sliding in and out the way you want it to. And you know, maybe the clearance wasn't enough. Maybe I would have had to go down to 10% instead of 5% down. But it looks like this one worked for me pretty well. And so we're finally finished with this print. It was a little bit more work than I had originally intended. We had made some mistakes along the way, but it did turn into a pretty good learning moment of how to get better at 3D printing. And remember that 3D printing will have mistakes. It's just part of the process. It's part of the learning curve. There will be failures in your prints, whether that's because of you setting up the print wrong or sometimes the printer just fails. And so it really did turn into a really good demonstration. And of course, we have that warping effect, which was actually really cool because that turns into a pretty good segue for the next video, so we can talk about preventing that, because that is a real issue with 3D printing.